So there are really two parts to an AI overview. There's the text that appears, and then there is the source links that appear below that text typically. Do I have it right that, like, in theory, we think that Google is generating that text before they determine what are those sources or source links that they want to pull into?
Yeah. And the reason why that might have been contrary to some initial belief is like you might think that Google's finding the source and then summarizing that source and pulling the content out, like how feature snippets sort of work, right? Where they like find the source and pull the data out. But it kind of seemed flipped, at least based on the patent, that the kind of opposite was happening, where they were generating like the snippet and then finding, okay, who verified? Who can we source for this snippet?
Hi, and welcome to the Optimized Podcast. My name is Nate Matherson, and I'm your host. On this weekly podcast, we sit down with some of the smartest minds in content marketing and SEO. Our goal is to give you perspective and insights on what's moving the needle in organic search. Today, I'm thrilled to sit down with Matt Lenhard. Matt is the co-founder and CTO of Positional, a company building the all-in-one tool set for content marketing and SEO teams. You might have heard of them. Now, we've talked about AI overviews on this podcast before, but on today's episode, Matt and I go in depth on AI overviews, and Matt shares some really interesting data and insights from a recent study that he's conducted. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Optimized Podcast. It's brought to you by Positional. If you don't know by now, my name's Nate, and I'm one of the co-founders of Positional, and we've built what I think is a pretty awesome tool set for content marketing and SEO teams. We've got tools for keyword research, internal linking, content optimization, and even a couple tools for analytics. We'd love for you to check it out at positional.com. Matt, thank you so much for coming on this week's episode of the Optimized Podcast.
Hey, Nate, thanks for having me. Long time no see, of 5 minutes ago. I'm excited to finally be on the podcast and chat. And also, I love the podcast voice. It's like slightly different. It's kind of funny.
For all of our listeners, know that Matt is like right over there. I can see him, but we're recording from two different locations in the same room. Matt, the first question I ask all of our listeners is, how did you get into the world of content marketing and SEO?
Well, I'm sure a lot of them, or a lot of your listeners, have probably heard a slight variation of this story because I got into SEO the same way you did, where we started a company together all the way back in college. It was in the financial lead gen space. Extremely difficult to acquire customers profitably in that space. We had tried, AdWords, PPC marketing on like all the social networks, Taboola, display advertising. And it was really a struggle to make the customer acquisition costs work within the bounds we needed it to. And luckily, we ended up finding SEO. We had some like early success there and kind of, decided that like this was the most efficient ways to acquire customers in that vertical. Dove headfirst in and kind of been doing it with you ever since. So it's been like 10 years, I guess, at this point.
Yeah, we've been working together a long time, since I think like 2014. So it's been a decade, a couple different companies, a lot of SEO, a lot of blog posts, and it's been a lot of fun. And I've been looking forward to this conversation all week. One, because it's the first time I've ever interviewed you for anything. But also two, everyone's been talking about Google's new AI overviews. ChatGPT just launched Search GPT, or at least announced it this week. So there's always change in SEO land. But from my understanding, you've recently done a pretty interesting and new analysis on Google's AI overviews to help our listeners and other SEOs better understand them, how they work, what goes into them. And I'm excited to unpack some of those learnings with you on today's episode. But Matt, first, could you tell our listeners what is an AI overview?
Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of people probably saw the chatter when they initially released, and everybody was kind of making fun of Google, but they're the snippet of text that will appear above the normal 10 blue links or the normal search results. And it basically will give a generalized overview of the query, kind of in more of like a chat type interface. Sometimes there will be reference links. There's always normally a see more button where it will continue generating. Oftentimes there's more reference links there as well, but it was kind of, to like put it succinctly, like Google's answer to ChatGPT, um, and just a new way of organizing the SERPs.
How often do AI overviews appear? Or at least, broadly, do AI overviews appear for every search query or for only some search queries?
The first thing to point out is they don't normally appear for incognito users. So users who aren't logged in, the vast majority of the time aren't going to see the AI overviews. So that's like a big kind of like threshold that needs to be crossed. And then alongside when they are shown, I don't have exact numbers. I think the SEMrush data was like a few percentage points, but even that's all the crawlers are done through logged out users. So I don't actually know that there's great insight into the exact proportion of SERPs that have them. The reason being, nobody is crawling the SERPs right now, or the vast majority of people aren't crawling SERPs at that type of scale with um, logged in Google accounts. So it kind of adds this like whole extra layer of complexity to the scraping that needs to be done. And that's why there's not a lot of super accurate, large scale kind of data sets yet.
Totally agree. And that's good context for our listeners is, and just to play it back to you, it sounds like AI overviews only appear for logged in users. And so knowing how often they appear right now is actually quite challenging because most SEO tools don't crawl or scrape the SERPs from logged in accounts. They do it from unlogged in accounts. And so it's hard to know how often they appear. Before the recording, you and I chatted a little bit about the mechanics of an AI overview, and you mentioned a recent Google patent to me that might offer some insights into how Google is generating AI overviews. It's a question I always get asked by our customers. How does Google determine what gets included in an AI overview? And so I'm going to ask you, for our listeners, how do you think Google is determining what it pulls into or displays in an AI overview?
I saw a little bit of chatter about this on Twitter, which is kind of like why I initially brought it up to you. And I guess before the like AI overviews had rolled out, or like this was actually before even SGE, Google's precursor to AI overviews, had fully rolled out. There was a paper outlining how you could essentially generate kind of like LLM type responses to search queries and then find references for them, with the actual generation of content being pretty similar to how typical LLMs work. But what I kind of found like most interesting is, what in regards to like what we do, how do you, how are they determining what gets pulled in as a reference alongside the text that's being um, generated? And what I found was that there's a few things that kind of were contrary to my initial thoughts of how I would have envisioned it working. The first being that, I guess like the most important almost being that they were generating the text first and then looking for sources based on the text that was generated. And the path that kind of like that led me down and why ultimately I brought it up to you was if the text is generated first, then they must be finding what to reference based on some type of like vector similarity calculation, alongside like the signals that they typically look at. And so it's cool to have like a starting point for, okay, this is maybe a possibility of how we could start optimizing for these.
So there are really two parts to an AI overview. There's the text that appears, and then there is the source links that appear below that text typically. Do I have it right that, like, in theory, we think that Google is generating that text before they determine what are those sources or source links that they want to pull into?
Yeah. And the reason why that might have been contrary to some initial belief is like, you might think that Google's finding the source and then summarizing that source, and pulling the content out, like how featured snippets sort of work, right? Where they like find the source, they pull the data out. But it kind of seemed flipped, at least based on the patent, that the kind of opposite was happening, where they were generating like the snippet and then finding, okay, who verified? Who can we source for this snippet?
Yeah, that sounds very different from a featured snippet, and also from even a SERP feature. Like, people also ask, where Google often generates those, also ask questions from the text of a source directly. And yeah, I agree with you. It feels like it would be the other way around. But maybe that is an opportunity for us SEOs. And I want to talk a little bit about that in a minute. But I know last month you worked with a member of our team to collect a large number of AI overviews and to do a little bit of research on them. Can you tell us about the data you collected and the reason you decided to study AI overviews?
Yeah. So they were obviously kind of brand new, super exciting. And after reading this paper, I kind of had a hunch for how we could start to optimize for them. So I know I came to you with a lot of enthusiasm, like, hey, can we rewrite these blog posts? I've got an idea. But yeah, so since like I said before that there's this issue where you needed a logged in user, it can be kind of difficult. So we actually like paid freelancers to just manually go as they were logged in and collect a bunch of these like AI overviews, all the reference sources across a number of different verticals. So we did like 500 AI overviews or 500 queries. They were all specifically targeted mainly to generate AI overviews. I figured out that questions are much more likely to generate AI overviews, so we targeted those. And then, paid a freelancer to go and collect all of them. And then the pieces of information that we collected were all of the URLs, the SERPs, which we collected with a script. By SERPs, I just mean the top 10 blue links, the text that was matched in the AI overview for the source. So as some people might have noticed, when you click on a AI overview source, it will link you over to that source and it will highlight a piece of text on that page that's often confirming or like referencing the AI overview itself. And so I collected that alongside the actual text in the article. And then finally the position of like all of these sources. And I thought the findings were pretty interesting. There's kind of like a few key things there. The most interesting thing that we found was kind of like confirmed my initial theory was that there's a high correlation between the cosine similarity of the AI overview alongside the matched text from the reference sources. So I'll kind of like break that down. Cosine similarity is a way to basically compare two vectors against each other. To make that even simpler, take two pieces of text and tell me how similar they are to each other. And what we found is that there's a high correlation, almost like exactly linear, between the vector similarity, the reference source, alongside how likely it was to have that like top position. So there's definitely Google's probably using something more sophisticated than cosine similarity, namely because cosine similarity doesn't look at if it's accurate or like the magnitude of the emotion. So cosine similarity would say, it was all the husband's fault and it was all the wife's fault. They're pretty similar, even though they're kind of saying the exact opposite thing. I'm sure Google has like another layer where they're kind of verifying things like that as well. But what we essentially found was that there's a very, very high similarity between the reference text and what Google's pulling in. And so from there, I was able to, go and update a few of our pages, optimize that cosine similarity in the given sections, and in a few cases get become one of the reference sources.
So by that first spot, you meant reference sources. And just to play it back, so it sounds like Google is generating an AI overview. They're then providing these reference sources. If you click on a reference source, it takes you to a piece of text within that web page that you've collected. And like in your analysis, you found that like the text that Google is referencing has a very high cosine similarity to the text that Google is generating for the AI overview. And if we buy that theory that Google is generating these AI overviews first and then looking for sources that support what they already want to say, then in theory, it could be possible to optimize for placement in an AI overview by creating text or including text that's high in cosine similarity to what's already existing within an AI overview. Do I have that right?
That's 100% right. And you've seen less sophisticated kind of chatter of this on Twitter, where people basically looked at AI reviews, taken the text, rewritten it, and published it, and been able to become one of the reference sources. Like all this being said, I don't think that'll last forever. It's probably going to get more sophisticated over time, but it did seem that like in the rush for Google to release this, there was some like cracks maybe in how the data was getting pulled in.
Yeah, was it Cyrus Shepard? Am I getting this wrong? Was it Cyrus that had done a similar kind of analysis and rewrite to his piece of content to then get it pulled into the AI overview?
Yeah, it was Cyrus. I think he did end up losing them, but it's kind of the same thing that we found, that like if you take the similarity of the two pieces of text, line them up, and you're already ranking decently well, so you're doing other things correctly, there was a good chance that you could get pulled in.
Yeah, your point on does this work forever or does this last forever? I would think probably not, because like as soon as like Google senses that people are trying to manipulate the SERP page, they generally don't like that. But and I wouldn't advise like the listeners of this podcast to go and modify all of their pages in some unhelpful way just to get included in an AI overview. But maybe it's something for us to think about. Like as we're creating a new piece of content, we already go through that checklist of, do we have an H1? maybe there's another part of that checklist where we try to see if we can, in theory, optimize for an AI overview, assuming it makes our content better.
Yeah, I think you definitely want to focus on like, does it actually improve the content? Google, anything that can be scaled in a kind of spammy like way, Google always cracks down on. Like those things never last. So I think tackling this from like, how do we use this information to make our content better, is probably the better long-term way to look at this.
Well, I think that's a really interesting point because you and I kind of tag teamed the edits together, where like you had gone back to some of the blog posts that I'd written and tried to figure out like if we could modify or add some text to possibly get our pages included into an AI overview. And I found that like in a lot of situations, the text that we were adding actually made the article more clear, or provided something that maybe we hadn't been previously that was helpful context to a reader. And so like through this exercise, yes, we were able to get our our articles in some of these AI overviews. But in any case, I think with many of these pieces of content that we edited, we actually just made our content more helpful. So maybe that's another way to look at this too. Like if an AI overview is saying something, it's probably pretty important. And maybe that could be something we'd want to touch on in our piece of content, regardless of if it gets included in the AI overview or not. Do you think that's a fair way to think about it for all the listeners out there?
Yeah, I actually think an interesting approach is that you can take sections of your article and use the AI overviews as a way to like prompt, like, what am I missing from this section? Like maybe how do I improve my bounce rate, right? And that you have an article on bounce rate and there's a section, how do I improve it? You could look at the AI review and see if Google came up with any like interesting ideas that you didn't, and then add them to make the piece of content better. So I think like looking at adjacent AI reviews and using them to see if any of the subsections of your article are missing anything is interesting strategy and just a way to like make the content overall more helpful.
And now just a quick word from one of our sponsors, actually our only sponsor, that is Positional.com. Positional has what I think is an awesome tool set for content marketers. We've got everything you need to take you from start to finish and help you scale this channel, as I've done over the last 11 years of my career. We'd love for you to check it out at Positional.com.
And, another question that I always get asked is there any sort of correlation between your position in the SERP, like one of those 10 blue links, and the likelihood that like you'd get pulled into an AI overview? And I think you did a little bit of analysis here as well. So just to recap, do you think there is any sort of correlation between a SERP's current ranking and the likelihood that it'll get pulled in as a source in an AI overview?
Yeah, there's definitely a correlation, and I'm sure we can include like the exact numbers in of reference when we post like the show notes. But yeah, I mean, the higher the first spot had double the amount of references as like the next. So generally, the things that work well for regular SEO or SERP optimization are going to work well for AI reviews. So I think stick to what's already working, and there's a good chance that you're going to show up in the reference.
Yeah, for our listeners, Matt did send me some of this data before this recording, so I have an advantage here. And I think, Matt, from the data you sent me, it looked like the number one search result was 55% more likely to be pulled in as an AI overview source versus the number two search result. And as another example, the number two search result was 90% more likely to be pulled in as an AI overview source versus the ninth search result. So it does appear that there is a correlation between current SERP ranking and the likelihood that a URL will get pulled in to the sources within an AI overview. Matt, I know, this is just one analysis and it is fairly limited, and there's probably many more AI overviews that we could go and analyze, but at least from our analysis, were you able to determine how many sources generally appeared in an AI overview?
Yeah, so we found that on average, there were 4.79 sources per AI overview without clicking show more.
4.79. It's my lucky number. Speaking of being included as a source, in an interview with Barry Schwartz at Search Engine Land, Google's Hema Budajaru, Google's Senior Director of Product Search Generative Experience, told Barry that the link cards within an AI overview generate a higher click-through rate than traditional web search results. She went on to compare the click-through rate increases from AI overviews to the CTR increases that a website owner will often see from featured snippet placements. Us SEOs, I know it's hard to listen to anything that Google has to say these days, but I'm going to ask you, do you think that AI overviews are actually going to send more traffic to publishers?
Maybe in the beginning. It'll be interesting to see how it works over time. I think in the beginning, people are always more willing to engage with it. But I think long term, it might be less. I also don't know if they're going to stick around because I don't think the experience is as good as Google's like current experience. Um, I also don't know, that answer from them was so vague and guarded. It's hard to take anything from it. Does it mean click through rate, like in terms of like any of the sources, the top source, like versus the featured snippet? How does like the difference in positions work? The overall click through rate. So it's hard to take anything from that because it was a very vague answer. But overall, I don't know. It'd be interesting to see how the AI reviews morph. I think the top results would probably might get more clicks overall, but I could see it becoming very winner take all. Like you want to be, top three, top four.
Yeah, Kevin Indig, a guest of this pod, did a little analysis here too, and it was back in May, and it was also a very limited sample size. But he found that when AI overviews were present, it caused an 8.9% drop in traffic from those queries, and that was about what I was expecting. I think it's within the range of what I was expecting. Had it been like a 40% drop off, I think we all might be questioning, is SEO dead? That's a question I'm going to ask you later. But, Kevin recently wrote that he sees AI overviews dropping in prevalence. He did an analysis from June, in June, I should say, versus the analysis he did in May. And he found that the prevalence of AI overviews, it's dropped by about 50 to 60% in that time, or how often they were appearing in search results. I know you mentioned just earlier that you think Google might roll back AI overviews or change them dramatically from here. Do you think that like AI overviews are going to be more or less prevalent in the SERPs in, let's say, 6 months from now?
Yeah, I mean, this is all a hunch, but I just don't think the user experience is as good. Like that's kind of what it boils down to for me. I don't think they're that helpful most of the time. That could change, but I don't think the current iteration is going to stick. I think if they're going to do something, it'll have to be dramatically different if they want to actually improve, um, like the core product.
Brian Dean on this podcast speculated that he wasn't that worried about AI overviews because he likened it to mobile, to say that like, everyone was very worried about mobile, like in dropping click-through rate on a mobile phone versus a desktop search. But ultimately, like mobile was great for search because a lot more people started searching. And even though click-through rate dropped slightly, like there were many more searches. And so traffic actually went up as a result. And he likened the rollout of SGE AI overviews to that release in mobile, basically saying that AI overviews are going to be so great that people are going to search so much more. And so even if there's a drop in traffic, or I should say click-through rate, there's going to be actually an increase in traffic. Would you buy that theory? Do you think these AI overviews, maybe not today, but in the future, are going to be so good that it'll actually lead to an increase in the number of searches happening?
Yeah, I can see that. I think if they're, depending on how Google rolls them out, it should be more interactive in a sense where it's easier to continually generate. I mean, I also just think like Google still said the vast majority of internet traffic referrals are still from Google. And it's not close. So, there's always going to be opportunity in information retrieval. That's kind of what it boils down to for me. Like people are always going to be looking to find things on the internet. And that's probably always going to be the best way to get referrals to your website. Like, obviously, information retrieval has changed dramatically over the years, but there's always going to be opportunities in it.
Well, Matt, information retrieval is a wonderful name for a racehorse. And I just checked as we were talking, and it's available. So for any of our listeners who are into horse racing, like me, you can name your next horse Information Retrieval. That is a Triple Crown winning horse race name right there. Matt, earlier on this podcast, you mentioned that it's very hard for SEO tools to get data on AI overviews because they're not appearing for non-logged in users. Do you think that like at some point Google is going to start displaying AI overviews for non-logged in users? Is it only a matter of time?
Yeah, I mean, that's the hunch. I guess the counter argument that maybe they won't is because it's too expensive to generate them. That's like a theory I've seen people toss around, but Google's printing so much cash. I don't really buy that. And they've never been worried about losing money. I think it'll be interesting to see how it interplays with ads. I wonder if that's like another reasoning. Like, does this affect ad click-through rates? How long till we see ads on top of or like in an AI overview? So I think there's probably like a couple factors at play there, but my hunch is not anytime soon.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like if Google, and they've said they will start rolling out, ad placements within AI overviews. I don't think they've exactly said how or what it's going to look like. But if that happens, then yeah, I think they'd want to roll it out to non-logged in users if there is like an uplift in how they monetize search. But yeah, Google has a war chest, so they have plenty of time to get this figured out. I want to transition a little bit. It's been a pretty hectic 12 months in search. You and I have got friends whose websites haven't done as well over this last year. We've got some friends whose sites seem to be doing quite well. So highs and lows for a lot of folks in SEO world over this last year. There's been a lot of change. I just have a few things I want to ask you. Backlinks. What do you think? Do you think backlinks are more or less important than they were when we first started working on SEO, let's say 10 years ago?
I knew you were going to ask this. All right. Backlinks are so important that they don't matter in the sense that, and this is something I actually got from you. You can look at the search and see for any competitive term in specific verticals. The same 5 sites rank, like US News, Forbes, and like you talked to people who work at some of these bigger sites, and SEO for them is, oh, we just write an article, publish it, and we're first. They don't do SEO. They just publish an article and it's first. So I do think backlinks matter. They might be a proxy for other things. So sites that have more RDs, backlinks, generally are going to be more popular sites. So maybe backlinks are just a proxy for how popular your website is. But the reason why they don't matter is because if you're in a competitive vertical, you're never going to be able to build backlinks fast enough for them to matter. Like everybody else already has too much of a head start on it, like compared to you. Like if you're in finance, you're never going to catch up to NerdWallet. You're never going to catch up to US News. So in that sense, like they don't matter, but in a bigger sense, they do. I am sort of curious, like how much are backlinks just a proxy for other site popularity metrics, or just like how well known that site is, which impacts things like click-through rate. So I kind of gave no answer there. They do matter, but they matter so much that they don't matter.
Yeah, well, say you were to start like the next generation NerdWallet, and the content that you create is twice as good as NerdWallet's, and it would dramatically improve the quality of the experience for a searcher if that content were to appear highly. But in a category like personal finance, like a brand new website, even if their content's like twice as good as a NerdWallet, could never rank if backlinks were like the only ranking factor. And as a result, the quality for Google searchers wouldn't necessarily be as good. So it feels like backlinks matter, but then if it was the only thing that mattered, then search would get stale. And there would be like then no new opportunity for an improved quality of experience for a searcher. Is that kind of what you were getting at a little bit?
Yeah, I think that plays on like they're almost like a proxy for how popular a site, how like much people like a site as well. Like people click on NerdWallet because they know it. People click on US News. Like my mom types in best credit cards and she sees US News. She's going to go, oh, I know US News. Like she trusts them, right? Because they've been around for a while. They've built up this credibility. And so they also have a ton of backlinks, but I think there's like something else to be said just about like the overall popularity and trust that site, those sites have built over time. People see the NerdWallet TV ads, and when they later go and search, they're probably more likely to click on that because they've seen them before. And so I think like just it's almost like correlation at this point where like the sites that have a ton of backlinks are just also more authoritative, but not necessarily because of the backlinks. They're more authoritative in general. Like NerdWallet's a publicly traded company. Like they're just more well known than like maybe the newer up and coming sites. And so I think backlinks matter. They're not all that matters, but I think they're also like a good proxy for the things that matter.
Right. Right. Thinking back, like back when you and I started our first company together, we were ranking in the SERPs, we were, doing just fine. And then all of a sudden, like one of the new kind of competitors, jumped us in the SERPs despite having, much lower page authority to any given page. But the thing is they were running a lot of TV ads and radio ads. And like overnight, like their brand became a very popular one. And so even though they had like lower domain authority or page authority to a specific page, like to your point of when someone is searching for best credit cards and they've heard of NerdWallet before, like they're probably going to be more likely to click on that SERP as a result.
Yeah. And to kind of add on to my previous answer, I don't think page authority or any type of like backlinks to a page matters much at all. I do think that there's some type of overall domain popularity metric that must be being used. Just looking at SERPs, anytime I Google a popular keyword, it's all 10 are sites that I'm very well familiar with. Very rarely see a site for the first time in Google search. And on your second point, there was actually, I believe I read something about this from the head of SEO at Wayfair, where they ran like a mini experiment where they bought TV ads encouraging people to search for like a specific term and then click them. And they saw positive impacts in ranking because of that. I might be butchering it a little bit, but that's kind of like the gist of it, is that there is an impact, like a initial impact between click-through rate and your rankings.
Right. I remember you mentioning that to me. And if we can find that URL, breaking down that Wayfair study analysis, we'll include it in the show notes. But I want to double click on something you said. Backlinks to a specific page doesn't matter. So you don't believe that we need to be building backlinks to any given URL on our site? It doesn't matter?
No, I think there's better uses of your time.
So speaking of uses of time, what's one thing that SEO teams spend time on that is just a total waste of time?
I think sometimes people can get over caught up in the details in regards to technical SEO. They'll over optimize these super small things that don't really make a difference. So like you'll see, we actually took this into account when we built our audit tools. We tried to pick things that like really mattered. Like this page is missing a title tag. That's not good. You should need a title tag. But I think oftentimes people over optimize like super, super minute technical SEO details. Like they'll spend, way too much time maybe perfectly writing this like alt text, and like that isn't going to make a huge difference at the end of the day. If you would have taken that time and thought, how do I make this article better? Is there like a widget I can add to it? Am I missing something that the other articles do cover? Is there any piece of data I could introduce to it that like nobody else has? That stuff's going to make a way bigger difference than your image alt text.
Totally. As JH said very early on in this podcast, you got to let the little fires burn and focus on the stuff that actually matters and will move the needle. Matt, this has been fun. I really enjoyed getting to know you on this podcast episode. If it's okay with you, I've got 5 or 6 different lightning round questions I'd love to ask you. Does that sound good?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so we're going to do an over-under. According to Bank of America, Google's global market share of search is 90.8% as of May 2024. Do you think Google's global market share of search is going to be over or under 90.8% in May of 2025?
Under, but not by much.
Search GPT. I recently heard that Search GPT is going to be rolling out. Do you think that your mom is going to use Search GPT anytime in the next 2 years?
There's no chance.
What's your favorite restaurant in Charleston?
Little Jack's. That's our go-to spot.
Yeah, so we will include a link to Little Jack's in the show notes. It's a fantastic spot for burgers for all our listeners next time you're in Charleston. And also let Matt and I know next time you're in Charleston. Matt, I'm going to give you a would you rather. We've done an over under. Let's do a would you rather. Let's say you've got $100,000 and you have to either invest it in Perplexity AI at a $3 billion valuation. I think that's the most recent reported valuation from some new fundraising round they're doing. So $3 billion in Perplexity, or in Google at a $2.06 trillion valuation, and you can't touch it for 10 years. Would you rather put that $100,000 in Perplexity or Google at today's market prices?
I mean, a Perplexity raised at $3 billion. That's insane to me. So yeah, Google, and it's not close. Sorry to the Perplexity team. Just, I don't know. They've got a lot of competition from a lot of really, really smart players who have a lot more money than they ever will.
Yeah. If anyone from Perplexity is listening, come on the pod. Let's talk about it. Matt, is SEO dead?
Yeah, there's always going to be information retrieval optimization. So
IRO.
Yeah, I mean, Google still sends the vast majority of referral traffic. Search engines, GPT, whatever you want to call them, there's always going to be a way to generate referral traffic for that. I mean, people are looking for stuff on the internet. There's going to be a way to optimize for that.
For sure. Well, Matt, thanks for coming on this week's episode of the Optimized Podcast. This has been so much fun. Is there anything else you want to say to our listeners?
Go check out Positional.com. I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, you've probably checked it out before, but I'm super excited about what we've built there, and we've got some cool tools coming out in the future that I'm really excited to share with everybody.
Yeah, we'll include a link to Positional on our website where these show notes will exist. And we'll also include a link to Matt's LinkedIn profile if you want to connect with him. It's a wrap. Thanks, Matt, for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
And that's a wrap. And I just want to thank our sponsor, Positional. They've got what is a pretty awesome tool set for content marketers and SEOs. They've even got a couple tools for social media. We'd love for you to check out Positional and the tool set that we've created over the last 15 months at Positional.com. And you can always reach out to me if you have any questions. My email is nate@positional.com. Whether you've got questions about our tool set or comments and complaints or even positive feedback about this podcast, I'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button wherever you are listening to this podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. Bye.